just want to get this over with so you can get back to the mall, don't you? Oh, you're in a nice mood tonight. Have you been out? No, you don't do your shopping yet. Have you been in one of the shopping malls at all?
Johnny Carson, the king of late night on American television, spent his life bound to laughter. But behind the blinding lights, his live broadcasts often turned into chaos. No one could have predicted from a pet animal peeing directly on his head to nearly losing his life. When a jaguar went berserk right on stage, to the moment a pop star suddenly climbed onto him, turning the talk show into a teasing performance that made the whole country blush. Those face-reddening moments became the very brand that set Carson apart from every other host, making him a one-of-a-kind legend in TV history. And now, let's dive into the 16 craziest moments of Johnny Carson number 9 will surely leave you speechless at an unbelievable laugh or cry disaster. Madonna sits on Johnny Carson's desk, turning the talk show into a teasing spectacle. In 1994, at the peak of her rebellious phase, with the Girly Show tour shaking the world, Madonna unexpectedly said yes to The Tonight Show. From the moment NBC announced the booking, the switchboard never stopped ringing. Tickets to Nikki Studio 6B in New York were hunted so hard that scalpers pushed prices up tenfold. People jostled just to see the Queen of Pop face the King of Late Night with their own eyes. That night, Madonna came out in a black corset, hugging her body. Lace gloves, hair tied high, eyes glittering with provocation. But instead of sitting in the guest chair, like everyone else, she casually climbed right onto Johnny Carson's desk. Crossing her legs suggestively, she leaned down and looked straight at him. "Johnny, I chose you because they say you're gentle." The audience screamed, whistles echoing around the studio. Ed McMahon beside them clutched his belly, laughing to hiccups, while Carson blushed, his back glued to the chair, as if he wanted to escape his very own desk. But Madonna didn't stop. She grabbed Carson's stack of cue cards, fanning herself like a fan, then suddenly tilted her head and asked directly, "Do you wear boxers or briefs?" The entire studio exploded. Carson choked for words, only able to glance toward the control room for help. At the peak, Madonna licked her finger, lightly touched the hot coffee cup on the desk, and whispered suggestively, "So hot." The studio air congealed, both teasing and tense. Tom Shales of the Washington Post wrote, "The next day, Carson looked like a deer in headlights, caught by the most dangerous pop star alive." By morning, NBC had received hundreds of complaints. Some local affiliates even hesitated to re-air the episode for fear of a conservative backlash. But paradoxically, Tonight Show ratings soared, breaking that season's record. Even the New York Times admitted never before has a TV talk show turned into such a provocative performance that the entire nation kept talking for weeks. Madonna could heat up the studio with a single glance and a quick perch on the desk, but nothing hurt Johnny Carson more than a stab in the back from someone he once considered family. It wasn't a mischievous monkey or a pop star, it was a protege who had been with him for 2 decades. Joan Rivers betrays her mentor, Johnny Carson, a 26-year rift that shocked Hollywood. For over 2 decades, Johnny Carson treated Joan Rivers like blood. He was the one who lifted her from tiny New York comedy clubs straight to the legendary stage of The Tonight Show. In 1965, before millions of viewers, Carson proudly pointed to her and said, "Remember this name, Joan Rivers. She's going to make it." The Los Angeles Times later called that introduction a golden springboard. Any comedian would dream of adding that Joan was Johnny's spiritual heir. But in October 1986, a relationship that seemed unbreakable exploded like a bomb in the middle of Hollywood. Joan secretly signed with Fox to host her own show, The Late Show, starring Joan Rivers, airing in the same time slot as The Tonight Show. It was a wild gamble Fox had just launched, while NBC's Tonight Show was an unassailable fortress for decades. When the news leaked, Joan hadn't yet picked up the phone to call her mentor before Variety splashed a shocking cover Fox steals Carson's protege. Johnny's assistant brought the paper into the dressing room. People said his face went from rosy to ghostly pale in seconds. When Joan called to explain, Carson coolly uttered a short line and hung up, never speaking to her again. From that day, he ordered the NBC team. The name Joan Rivers is never to be mentioned on The Tonight Show. What shocked people most was that Carson had treated Joan like a daughter, especially after he lost his son, Rick, in a 1981 car accident. This betrayal felt like a second loss. In a private 1987 interview with journalist Tom Shales of the Washington Post, Carson was described as so cold he wouldn't utter a word about Joan, as if she had never existed. The silence lasted 26 years. Only in 2014, when Jimmy Fallon hosted The Night Show, was Joan Rivers invited back to the NBC stage. But Johnny Carson had already been resting in his grave for nearly a decade. Industry whispers said that even if he had lived, he would never have forgiven her. The tale became clear proof that behind the glitter, American television is more bitter and ruthless than any movie. The monkey Mo pees straight onto Johnny Carson's head on live TV. If the Joan Rivers story hurt Johnny enough to sever ties, the next incident left him humiliated in a way impossible to forget. One evening in early 1976, NBC viewers witnessed a legendary TV mishap. Animal expert Joan Embury, the familiar face from the San Diego Zoo, appeared with a small monkey named Mo. During rehearsal, Mo obediently clung to its handler, making Carson chuckle. A breathing little puffball. Adorable. But when the hot lights came on and the camera moved in close, Mo suddenly sprang onto Carson's head. It clung to his silver gel-slicked hair that Johnny had spent nearly 20 minutes preparing. Before the audience could even react, Mo let out a sharp screech and then poured straight down the collar of his suit. The studio erupted in laughter. Ed McMahon smashed the desk until his face turned red, and the cameraman's hands shook so hard the shot drifted. Carson tried to keep calm, forced a strained smile, and quipped, "Feels like a drizzle in the studio." But look closely. His hand trembled around a tissue, and his eyes flashed with anger. After they cut, he sprinted to the makeup room, washed his hair under the tap, and muttered, "I can't sit and talk with an animal that peed on my head." Fearing he would refuse all animal segments, NBC hung a warning sign at the studio door. "Careful, Johnny's hair is not a branch." The New York Post ran a cheeky headline next day: Carson gets golden shower from Hollywood's wildest monkey. Though Carson hated it, the clip was replayed for years on blooper shows and even landed in TV Guide's top 10 funniest TV moments of all time. But if a tiny monkey could shake Carson that badly, imagine what happened when he faced a true predator. Johnny Carson nearly loses his life to a roaring jaguar at NBC 6B. Not long after Mo had the whole country laughing, The Tonight Show again took center stage with a scene that made the entire NBC crew break into a cold sweat. That evening, animal trainer Ron Shannon walked on with a full-grown jaguar flown in from the San Diego Zoo just hours earlier. The crowd cheered. Johnny Carson was amused, at first even edging closer to the steel cage set in the middle of the studio. Under the spotlights, the animal sat still, its golden eyes drilling into Carson like a stalker. He bent down, voice lowered, and asked softly, "Is it gentle, Ron?" Shannon hadn't opened his mouth when the jaguar suddenly thundered into the bars. The roar reverberated across the studio claws, sparking against the mesh. Hundreds of audience members screamed. Many leapt to their feet, chairs clattering. Carson panicked, falling flat on his back, tie askew, face drained of blood. In that breathless moment, he clambered up, adjusted his mic, and forced a joke. "I just lost 9 lives." The audience clapped awkwardly, but everyone could see his hands trembling as he gripped the cue cards. The next morning, the Los Angeles Times blared Johnny Carson the night he looked death in the eye. An anonymous technician said that after the taping, Carson locked his dressing room and chain-smoked extremely rare since he hated the smell of cigarettes. NBC treated it as ratings gold, replaying his tumble-in compilation shows for years, despite dozens of pleas from Carson to remove it. Writers at Variety and the Washington Post agreed it was one of the rare times the king of late night truly brushed against death. And if a jaguar could rattle him that badly, imagine when a close friend, Hollywood's sharpest insult comic, accidentally destroyed Carson's sacred keepsake. Don Rickles breaks Johnny's holy box and pays with public humiliation. On the Tonight Show desk, amid the lights and cameras, there was always a small wooden box placed neatly. Not just a prop, this was a treasure to Johnny Carson. An NBC technician who once saved him during a minor fire at the Burbank studio in 1962 had given him the box as a keepsake. Over the years, that cigarette box became his lucky charm. He never went on air without it. Then, in 1976, while Carson vacationed in Florida, comedian Don Rickles was invited to guest host. Famous for his acid tongue, Rickles lived to poke and meddle. In a burst of showy energy, he suddenly grabbed the box and waved it at the audience. Laughter boomed, but disaster struck as the lid snapped hard, split in two, and hit the floor with a cold clack. Rickles froze for a few seconds, then jeered, "Oh, must be cheap." The line went straight into the mic and across America. The next night, Carson returned. Sitting down, he discovered the broken box. The entire NBC crew fell silent. No one dared breathe. Learning Rickles was the culprit. Carson said nothing, picked up the box, and walked straight to the adjacent stage where Rickles' sitcom, CPO Sharkey, was filming. The audience burst into applause when Johnny Carson appeared out of nowhere. Raising the broken box, he growled, "Don, you broke my stuff, didn't you?" Rickles turned pale, stammering, "No, I was just kidding, Johnny." The studio exploded with laughter, and this time, Hollywood's insult king was turned into the joke by his best friend. The Los Angeles Times ran a tart headline the next day. For once, the insult king was speechless. The clip later became one of NBC's classics, showing that even Hollywood's brashest troublemaker couldn't touch Johnny Carson's sacred keepsake. If Rickles enraged Carson by breaking a small trinket, just wait to see how Johnny reacted when a pop queen turned The Tonight Show into her own stage, flaunting bold provocations in front of millions. A baby elephant panics, unleashing a brown waterfall on NBC's stage. NBC had long believed bringing wild animals onto The Tonight Show was the easiest way to grab ratings. One night in the mid-70s, they went big fly, a baby elephant from the Los Angeles Zoo to New York. The idea sounded simple. The elephant would step on stage, flap its ears, wave its trunk, and the crowd would go wild. Reality became a disaster. The moment the studio lights hit, the baby elephant panicked. It bellowed thunderously and suddenly opened the floodgates right in the middle of the stage. A massive stream of waste poured across the floor, steaming under the hot lights, the stench spreading so fast that the audience clutched their noses and screamed. Some even ran straight out. NBC's cleanup crew rushed in, but the slick floor sent them slipping and tumbling again and again in the brown waterfall. The cameras were forced to cut quickly to a close shot of Carson's face, deliberately hiding the battlefield behind. But the studio audience had seen everything. Many described it as a natural disaster right in the middle of prime-time TV. Carson pinched his nose, rolled his chair back nearly 10 feet, then looked at bandleader Doc Severinsen and dropped a tart line, "I assume you ordered takeout." The audience laughed and coughed at once, unsure whether it was the joke or the smell. The next day, the Chicago Tribune ran a big headline, "Elephant Turns Tonight Show into Disaster Zone." NBC hurried to apologize and decreed from then on, any large animal on stage must have plastic flooring laid down, and the janitorial team would receive biohazard hazard pay. Carson later joked many times, "I've been peed on by a monkey, nearly mauled by a jaguar, but I never thought I'd suffocate in elephant poop." And if a one-ton animal could trouble Carson that much, then Farrah Fawcett, the blonde star of Charlie's Angels, made him even more flustered, not by waste, but by a woman who seemed to be floating in outer space. Farrah Fawcett, seasick on The Tonight Show. In 1991, Farrah Fawcett, Hollywood's sultry blonde icon, who once captivated the world in Charlie's Angels, appeared on The Tonight Show to promote the film Saturn III. It was a rare NBC appearance after a long hiatus, and America was abuzz. Audience tickets that night were scalped for 5 times face value. Farrah walked out in a shimmering, body-hugging silver jumpsuit, golden hair billowing as if she'd just stepped out of a shampoo ad. The audience rose to its feet, applauding wildly, and Johnny Carson flashed his trademark gentlemanly smile. But within minutes, that excitement turned into bewilderment. Farrah began speaking in non sequiturs. She leaned back in the chair, dreamy. I dreamed I was a dolphin, swimming in the blue ocean. This microphone. Oh, it's exactly like a giant lollipop. The audience traded uneasy smiles. Carson tapped his pen on the desk, his famous signal that he was extremely annoyed. But Farrah didn't stop. She stared at Doc Severinson's band and whispered, "Those horns are glowing so beautiful." Then suddenly brushed invisible dust from Carson's shoulder, nearly knocking him off his chair. The studio laughed, but it was the nervous kind. USA Today headlined, "The next day, Farrah's bizarre Tonight Show comedy tragedy, or breakdown." Some Hollywood reporter-writers rumored she'd overused painkillers. Others said she was exhausted by a grueling promo schedule. Some viewers even wrote directly to NBC, asking them to keep guests healthy before airtime. The night was quickly dubbed Car Crash TV. Carson, who had faced a Jaguar and endured Madonna's teasing takeover, could only smile wryly and cut the interview short. When the cameras stopped, he turned to the crew and sighed, "This was the longest night of my life." If Farrah tormented Carson with her strange floaty state, a cocky young comedian soon made him truly furious, with nothing more than a tap on the shoulder, live on air. Chevy Chase's arrogance and the fateful shoulder pat. In 1970, NBC Burbank's Tonight Show witnessed one of the tensest nights in its history. The guest was Chevy Chase, the star who had just left Saturday Night Live after 2 years of being hailed as Hollywood's newest phenomenon. He walked into the studio amid cheers and blazing lights, but instead of humility, he behaved as if it were his own show. On his first line, Chase cut off. Carson pointed at Johnny's red-striped thumb tie and sneered, "Johnny, you planning to sell insurance?" The audience roared, but Carson's smile was forced. His finger began tapping the pen over and over, a familiar sign that anger was simmering. Chase went on bragging about his fame, boasting that Time had just put him on the cover. Then suddenly stood up, spun around, and soaked in louder applause. Carson tried to steer the conversation back to foul play which had just opened, but Chase brazenly cut him off as if he hadn't heard. The climax came when Chase slapped Carson firmly on the shoulder. That seemingly harmless touch made the entire studio hold its breath. The camera pushed in. Carson's face was ice. He tilted his head, looked straight into Chase's eyes, and his voice dropped. "Touch me again, and you can host this by yourself." The air turned thick. Some audience members later told the Los Angeles Times they felt goosebumps all over, like Johnny was about to punch Chase in the face. The actor forced a smile, but from that moment, his relationship with The Tonight Show was over. After the taping, Carson told the head producer bluntly, "Don't let that guy ever set foot here again." Indeed, from that day, Chevy Chase was permanently blacklisted. Variety ran the bitter line, from Hollywood's rising star to Carson's blacklist. This was considered the harshest fall of Chase's golden era. It proved an unshakable rule: no matter how famous you are, If you dare bruise Johnny Carson's ego on live TV, you've dug your own grave. If Chevy Chase only enraged Carson with arrogance, Wayne Newton, Mr. Las Vegas, went even further. That time, Carson wasn't just angry. He felt truly threatened when Newton confronted, pointed, and warned him right inside NBC. Wayne Newton storms NBC and threatens Johnny Carson to his face. Wayne Newton is a name intertwined with Las Vegas, known by the nickname Mr. Las Vegas. But behind the stage lights, Newton was often mocked for his glossy look, high voice, and a flurry of rumors about mafia ties. Johnny Carson didn't miss the chance. For years in his monologues, he laid into Newton mercilessly. Wayne Newton wears more makeup than the Rockettes at Radio City, or the Jibe. He must have landed that casino contract thanks to friends in the shadows. The audience howled, but to Newton, each line was a knife cut to his honor. In early 1980, the last straw fell. One afternoon, Newton drove a black Cadillac to NBC Burbank without warning. He walked straight past the security gate, stormed down the hallway. Staffers turned pale. No one dared to stop him. Newton shoved open Carson's office door and slammed the desk so hard a coffee cup spilled to the floor. "Crack one more joke with my name, and there'll be big trouble, Johnny." Newton's voice ground out each word, face flushed, eyes blazing. Carson sat still, silent, lips pressed tight. The room went dead quiet. After a few tense seconds that felt like an hour, Newton turned and left the air heavy behind him. The Los Angeles Times called it the most infamous backstage shock in Tonight Show history. And indeed, from that day on, Wayne Newton's name vanished from every script. Not a mention, not a jab. For the first time, the king of late night backed off. If Wayne Newton made Carson retreat with a face-to-face threat, then Raymond Burr, the legendary star of Perry Mason, chose a chilling silence, one that hurt Johnny far more. Raymond Burr walks away in silence after being mocked for his weight. Raymond Burr, the face of Perry Mason and Ironside, had long been loved by audiences for his calm demeanor and deep voice. But he carried a shame he could never hide his weight. Burr hated being called the gentle giant because to him it wasn't a compliment but a wound. Johnny Carson had no such restraint. For years he turned Raymond Burr's name into a sacrifice for his opening monologues. Once Carson sneered Raymond Burr steps into an elevator and the whole building sighs. Another time he said if he walked into a gym, the treadmill would run away. Audiences roared. The Chicago Tribune even quoted the joke as a model of satirical humor. But for Burr, it was humiliation. According to a close friend, Burr once sent a private message to NBC's team, "Please tell Johnny to stop. I can't take it anymore." But that plea was either ignored or never reached Carson's ears. In 1976, Burr accepted a final appearance on The Tonight Show. On air, he still smiled and answered every question politely. But when the cameras went off, he stood up, shook hands out of courtesy, and walked straight to the door. Burr never returned. Carson later sent multiple invitations, letters, even phone calls, but Burr refused them all. The New York Post offered a biting line: "No shouting, no drama, just silence. and silence was deadlier than any threat. This is considered Johnny Carson's most famous Cold War. No shouting, no noise, only a chilling silence, the kind that made Carson realize that sometimes a thoughtless joke is enough to break a relationship built over decades. If Raymond Burr chose silence as his response, there was another time when Johnny Carson chose the opposite. A public eruption, a direct confrontation with America's most powerful newspaper, the New York Times. And that time, he was no longer a jester, but a warrior on live television. Johnny Carson explodes, publicly scolds the New York Times. In May 1980, America reeled from an economic crisis. Gas prices spiked, unemployment climbed, and many families pinched every penny. Amid this, the New York Times published an article that shocked the public. Johnny Carson pocketed up to $25 million a year, dubbed the richest host in television history. The paper went on to sneer that such a colossal salary made Carson a symbol of greed in a time of hardship. Within hours of publication, NBC's switchboard trunged nonstop. Furious callers shouted, "He sits there laughing while we lose our jobs and our homes." Carson read the piece in his dressing room, so angry, he hurled the Times to the floor, pages flying everywhere. That night, NBC's Burbank studio was packed. People expected a fun monologue as usual. But instead of skewering President Carter or Hollywood, Carson walked out, face flushed, holding up the New York Times to the camera. His voice rang out firm and hard. "This is a smear. They printed the wrong numbers, they hurt me. And I will not stay silent while being painted as greedy in front of you." The audience was stunned. The man known for his calm, who could turn anything into a joke, now laid bare his rawest anger. The Washington Post commented the next morning, "Last night, America saw Johnny Carson not as a joker, but as a man offended to the core of his honor." NBC immediately received thousands of letters. Half supported Carson, saying he bravely faced down the press. The other half accused him of arrogance, blind to his lavish life in a country on its knees. Whatever the debate, that moment went down in history as one of the rare times the king of late night tore off the mask of humor to reveal a proud, sensitive man willing to openly challenge the most powerful newspaper in America. The incident showed that Carson could erupt on national television. But the anger didn't just come from the press. Sometimes it burst forth from his guests. One of the most shocking counterattacks came when author Jocelyn Suzanne flung a cocktail straight into his face before hundreds of people at a lavish party. Jacqueline Suzanne throws a cocktail in Johnny's face. Jacqueline Suzanne, author of the bestseller Valley of the Dolls, was used to derision from critics. But that night, she heard the sharpest jabs from Johnny Carson himself. In his introduction, he half joked, half mocked. "Ladies and gentlemen, here's the woman who wrote the book every psychiatrist should prescribe to their patients." The audience roared, and Carson went on. "She looks more like a truck driver than a romantic novelist." The studio erupted in laughter, but Jacqueline forced a smile, eyes flashing with anger. Throughout the interview, she kept her cool and answered softly, but inside, she burned. When the cameras went off, Carson thought it was over. He had no idea the storm was coming. After the taping, the crew and guests moved to the Beverly Hilton for the after party. Warm golden lights, soft jazz glasses clinking. It felt perfect until Jacqueline stood before Carson. In her hand was a black Russian vodka with dark coffee liqueur. She stepped in close, looked him straight in the eye, and flung it. The entire cocktail splashed across Carson's face. The sea liquid streamed through his hair. His Armani suit was soaked. The room fell silent. Hundreds of witnesses heard only Carson's sharp inhale, his face frozen as if slapped. Jacqueline set the glass down without a word and walked away under the stunned gaze of the room. The New York Daily News blared the next morning. Last night, Johnny Carson baptized in vodka. Rumors spread through Beverly Hills that Carson immediately banned Suzanne from The Tonight Show for life, despite her status as one of America's best-selling female novelists. The moment wasn't just a TV shock. It proved that sometimes the targets of Carson's jokes chose to strike back publicly and ruthlessly. But even after being humiliated at a party, what hurt Carson most didn't come from the press or guests. It came from his own family. A blazing argument with his son Rick left a scar that never healed in the heart of a man thought to be untouchable. The horrific fight between Johnny and his son Rick. In 1987, the Beverly Hilton glittered as NBC threw a grand gala for the 25th anniversary of The Tonight Show. It was one of the decade's grandest entertainment events. Frank Sinatra sat beside Elizabeth Taylor, and beyond them were rows of politicians and media tycoons. Everyone thought it would be a celebration of Johnny Carson, the man who had become an American cultural icon, bringing laughter to millions every night. But behind the warm glow and the clinking champagne, a family tragedy suddenly erupted. Rick Carson, Johnny's middle son, showed up unannounced. Their relationship had cooled for years because Johnny was consumed by NBC and rarely home. Relatives used to say Johnny gave his whole heart to the audience, but left his family standing outside. One guest recalled that as Carson shook hands with dignitaries, Rick approached and whispered something. Seconds later, the mood shifted. Rick's voice rang out across the ballroom. "You always care only about the audience. What about us?" The hall fell heavy. Carson Facepel replied coldly, "This isn't the place for that." Some nearby said the two nearly came to blows, if not for friends who stepped in. Carson left early suit, rumpled face like stone. A tribute turned into a bitter memory. The tragedy didn't end there. 4 years later, in 1991, Rick died in a horrific car accident in California. The news altered Hollywood. The Los Angeles Times wrote Johnny Carson's greatest tragedy didn't happen on television. It happened within his own family. Relatives whispered that Carson never forgave himself for that night at the Beverly Hilton when father and son never had time to reconcile. That shock became a scar that never healed. And while his private pain still haunted him, Carson faced a public unmasking live on air, this time from a man posing as a psychic, Uri Geller. Uri Geller, exposed for spoon-bending live on air. In 1973, American television was swept up by Uri Geller, the man who claimed psychic powers bending spoons, stopping watches, reading minds. Everywhere, from CBS to ABC talk shows, lined up to book him. Time magazine even ran a feature calling Geller living proof of the supernatural. But Johnny Carson was different. A seasoned magician, since his Nebraska youth he had performed at town fairs and knew such powers were stage tricks. He secretly enlisted famed skeptic James Randi to prepare the props. All the spoons and boxes were sealed and locked in an NBC safe, absolutely out of Geller's reach before airtime. When the lights came up, Geller placed a spoon on his forehead, closed his eyes and muttered, 1 minute. Nothing. 2 minutes. The audience started murmuring. Geller trembled, sweat dripping down his hands. He stammered, I feel negative energy in this room. Carson sat calm, eyes sharp. He dropped a cold quip. We'll give you more time in the next life. The studio erupted with laughter. Geller flushed awkwardly, ending the segment in humiliation. The New York Times headlined the next day, Carson breaks the spoon bender's career. From TV star, Geller became a national punchline. Other shows canceled his bookings, while Carson was praised as the one man bold enough to unmask a fraud live on the air. That moment proved The Tonight Show wasn't just for laughs, it was an arena where those living off illusion could be toppled. But not everyone stayed quiet like Uri Geller. Another hot-tempered female guest chose to retaliate on the spot. She tossed water right into Carson's face before millions watching live. Johnny gets water thrown in his face live on air. In 1987, The Tonight Show witnessed one of its most memorable incidents. The guest that night was Bette Midler, Hollywood actress and singer famed as the divine Miss M for her bold personality and unfiltered tongue. As she stepped onto NBC Burbank's stage, thunderous cheers erupted. Carson flashed his familiar smile, ready for laughs. But the light mood didn't last. During the chat, Carson quipped about Midler's looks. If I needed a wrestler in the studio, I'd call Bette. The audience laughed, but Midler's face hardened. He didn't stop there, hinting at her scandal-laced love life. In Hollywood, not everyone can keep their voice and a dozen boyfriends at once. The studio held its breath. Known for her temper, Midler refused to swallow it. She calmly lifted the water glass on the table, stood, stared Carson in the eye, and threw it into his face. The cameras caught it all. Johnny Carson's soaked tie, dripping meticulously gelled hair collapsing onto his forehead. The crowd groaned. Some gaped. Others laughed uneasily. Carson tried to save it with cooler than the air conditioning. But everyone knew he had just been publicly humiliated. The New York Post shouted the next day, splash heard across America. Johnny Carson doused live on air. Letters flooded NBC, half condemned Midler as rude. The other half applauded her for striking back. The clip soon landed in blooper reels and kept airing for decades as one of TV's rare live shocks. The Bette Midler incident shook the nation, but an even bigger shock lay ahead a few nights later when Johnny Carson said goodbye to The Tonight Show. Viewers expected tears. Instead, they witnessed a fiery, on-air showdown. Johnny Carson's last-minute on-air showdown. On May 22nd, 1992, the final episode of The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, aired. It was a national event. More than 50 million Americans turned on their TVs. NBC brought in a full orchestra, and the studio was packed with legends. Everyone thought Carson would leave in tears, arms full of flowers, amid choked sobs. But the truth was entirely different. In the final segment, Carson brought on a special group of guests, including a young rising comedian, seen as the next generation. At first, the mood was affectionate stories of old times, bringing a lump to the throat. Suddenly, the young comedian smiled and said, "Johnny, you're a legend." No one denies that. But late night has changed. Today's audience wants boldness, not gentle chuckles anymore. The studio fell silent. Johnny Carson set down his coffee cup, looked straight at the guest, and said in a low, firm voice, "You think I'm outdated? What I built here will outlast any successor who sits in this chair." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The young comedian didn't back down, replying, "You're the past, Johnny. The future belongs to us." This time, Carson erupted. He leaned forward, slammed the desk, eyes blazing. "The past. I'm the one who created the future you're living off." The audience shot to its feet. Some booed, others cheered. Tension ran so high that NBC's security in the wings stood ready, afraid the war of words would turn into a real scuffle. The Los Angeles Times wrote the next day, Carson didn't leave the stage in tears, but in flames. He ended not as a comedian, but as a general defending his last fortress. NBC received thousands of responses. Longtime fans called it the most glorious ending. Some critics said Carson didn't know how to let go. Either way, the night of May 22, 1992, became one of the most controversial farewells in American TV history. Johnny Carson ended his career not with roses or soft music, but with thunderous applause, heated arguments, and the stunned amazement of his audience. That was his legacy. Never safe, never dull, always ready to explode right up to the final moment.